So, as many of you are probably already aware, Sony recently announced the PS4 Back Button Attachment for the Dualshock 4, which adds 2 additional buttons to the rear of the controller with a little OLED screen on the back to control your presets. I've spent about a week with it now, tested a good amount of games, and I think now's a good time to do an unboxing and general review to see if it's worth it and if you need this to improve your gameplay. Starting with the unboxing, it's pretty straightforward. The device is very tiny, and you'll almost always be surprised once you see the box in person. There's an initial paper warning you to read it first, and these instructions are cautioning you on how to properly attach it to your DualShock 4. Then there's the actual back button attachment with more instructions on the bottom. The attachment itself seems to have a solid build quality, and the tiny little OLED display will pretty much immediately collect fingerprints. Now, there's a reason why the first paper warns you to read it, as Sony doesn't want you damaging the device when putting it onto your controller. It's a bit tricky. The stereo plug is slightly adjustable, so the idea here is to line up the stereo plug with the headset jack on your DualShock 4 as is, and then push the attachment forward. Don't try and adjust the swivel, just align first and push forward. This creates a very firm attachment to your controller, and you'll have no worries about it coming off. Once it's on, it's held in there pretty good. So, a lot of you actually don't even know what the back button attachment is. This will give your DualShock 4 2 completely remappable buttons on the back of the controller. This is something seen in a lot of higher end controllers offered on the market currently, most notably Microsoft's Elite Series controllers. But PS4 owners might also know about the line of SCUF controllers, which a lot of controllers that offer back buttons go for well over $100 to $200. This is Sony's first official offering and retroactive cost-effective solution. With an MSRP of $30, anyone can add 2 back buttons to any stock DualShock 4 no problem. The back of the device features a tiny OLED display that comes on once connected to signal it's working, and then goes away. You can click the display to show your currently used preset. You can store up to 3 different presets, and you can cycle through them by 2 fast clicks. To change a preset, simply click and hold for a second or 2. Then use the back buttons themselves to pick the button you want to map. You can assign any button you want except the share button and the touchpad. Now, it's important to note you're not removing the original button's function. You can still press the original button on the front of the controller and it will still accept inputs in addition to the newly assigned one on the back. The back buttons themselves may appear wobbly on video, but they won't easily accept unintended presses. When holding the controller, you're not hitting the innermost part. It's the outer portion that you press, and it gives back a very responsive, loud click. Now, before going any further, another thing I noticed a lot of PS4 owners asking is, well, why? What is this thing for? Well, as an example, if you're playing an FPS like Call of Duty, you could assign square to the back button. That way you don't have to take your hand off the right thumbstick in order to reload. Or L3, so you can quickly sprint and never have to worry about having to click in the stick. Maybe you're playing Destiny and you feel it's better to assign X to the back so you can focus on aiming while performing jumps. These are just a few examples where a lot of more competitive players like to make use for these kinds of accessibility buttons. But the great part about those premium controllers, or this, is that the buttons are programmable and you can really set them however you see fit for whatever game you want. This will work wherever, whenever. You can easily swap this to another controller and the presets are saved directly to the device. These inputs will follow a connected DualShock 4 no matter where it's used. That includes PC or even phones. And for those worried about the headphone jack being blocked, it's still accessible on the button with no noticeable drop in audio quality. So, actually playing games with the back button attachment, there is certainly a learning curve if you've never played with something like this before, especially considering this goes on a stock controller. I'm seeing a lot of people asking if this gets in the way of resting their fingers, and the answer is yes, and also no. You can rest your fingers on this naturally without worrying that you're going to accidentally hit the buttons, but it's the attachment you're resting your fingers on at all times. So initially, this is going to feel very foreign to you because it changes the dynamic of how you would normally hold it. But this isn't really a huge deal. I adjusted to it after a few matches of Modern Warfare Remastered. That's the easy part. Taking advantage of the buttons is where the fun begins and where you can really start to extend your play. The responsiveness of the buttons are pretty much what you'd expect. I wouldn't really consider this a top tier option to get your response time down in competitive play, since these require more pressure for input than some of the more premium controllers that offer higher sensitivity. But this is a very accessible entry point without having to pony up the extra cash. With this, you get 2 buttons with 3 modes, and then the $150 controllers are offering up to 4 back buttons, swappable sticks, sensitivity adjustments, and so on. For the most part, my playtime with the attachment has been a positive positive one. The longer you have it, the more ideas you can think of to make your gameplay better suit you, and I think that's what makes this a great low-cost option for those interested. Having said that, there are some gripes. For the function this serves, it would have been more convenient to have the OLED up front so you can easily see your presets and change what you need to without flipping the controller around. Maybe they couldn't make that work with the smaller real estate up front, but that would have been more convenient. Also, for me, I use a docking station with my controllers where the DualShock 4 clicks in from the bottom, so this has to come off anytime I want to charge again. Luckily, there are docking stations that plug in from the top, so if you have one of those, then you have nothing to worry about. It also does make the controller a little bit heavier, but that's not really much of a problem, just me wondering if it could have been shrunken down more. Other than that, though, it works like it should, and this will only be worth it to those that think this will genuinely better their experience with their favorite games. This isn't the best pro option like I mentioned earlier, but this is an accessible entry point to this style of play, and see what does and doesn't work for you based on the experimentation that you do. For me personally, I found it very convenient to map things that often needed me to take my thumb off the analog sticks. Admittedly, most people don't need this, but if you are considering it, then I say it's worth a shot. And I mostly say that because it does seem a bit weird that Sony's just now adding this to the DualShock 4 near the end of the PS4's life cycle. The big elephant here that a lot of people have been asking me about is, well, what about PlayStation 5, DualShock 5? Is this something Sony will do with the DualShock 5 controller? Is this something that they'll further iterate on? And to that effect, of course, I don't necessarily know that for certain. However, it appears to me that the reason why they've done this late in the life cycle is for a few reasons, that there will be forward-backwards compatibility with the controllers. Presumably, you can use a DS4 on PlayStation 5, and vice versa. A DS5 can go back to PS4. But I'm slightly thinking that perhaps this will also actually attach to a DualShock 5. Now, we do have a few patent images showing the controller. We do have a few leaks showing a prototype controller where it does look a bit more bulky, but it appears as though potentially this could still fit on that. I don't think that Sony would add to the stock controller rear buttons. That to me seems rather unnecessary, point blank, because most people really don't need something like this. Now, having said that, I don't think the stock DualShock 5 will have back buttons in it. I don't think that's what they're going to ship with every single system, because we do have another patent that shows what appears to be a DualShock 4, not the more bulky layout of a DualShock 5 or those prototypes we've seen. This patent shows very clearly a DS4, but it does have back buttons on that one as well. So I think this is something that Sony would offer with it built in. So I think it would be an option that they're exploring if it does actually come to retail. But as a standard, I don't think that will be the case. I think it will either be the attachment can go on both controllers, or they'll offer one that also just has it built in. That's at least how I feel in terms of PS5, but that's highly speculative. Now, just to round this out, I do want to answer a few other questions that I asked you over on the community tab of my YouTube channel. A lot of humorous comments over there, but I'll answer some of the other ones that I didn't write up in the main review there. Monkey Gamer, is it comfortable? Do you accidentally hit the button from time to time? Those were answered, but does it drain the PS4 controller battery faster? I didn't really see that. It's one of those things where DS4s don't really have a great battery life to begin with. I'd imagine this is a very low power device, so it didn't appear as though it really drained the battery much faster. For Sony user Mike, important question. Can you assign button combos, circle plus square for example, to it, or just one button? So you can't do combos, but to play off of that, that might be something that you might want to explore. Experimentation is pretty important with this thing, and if you are playing something like a fighter where there's a lot of combinations that you can pull off and you're using a controller, you can assign something to the back and use that in relation to the other button that you would need to pull off that combo, for example, and that might work out better for you. Again, a lot of it comes into experimentation, but I think there actually are a good amount of ways that you could use it for a fighter, absolutely. Ben Mac, is it annoying having the controller be more bulky or heavy? When is it actually useful? So I feel like I answered the second part, but your first part, no, it's not really annoying, although I did notice that I guess I realize now that every time I pick up a DualShock 4 off the table, I always underhand it, and now I can't do that because the attachment stops that. So now when the attachment's on, I grab it from the top. And for people that are still concerned about like how it feels, again, you do have to rest your fingers on the attachment, but when I held a controller without the attachment, then that felt weird. So it really is a matter of just use it for a little bit, you will get used to it. Miles Dyer says, how does it compare to the back paddles on the Scuff controller? Mine cost $200+ and was busted within a year. This looks like a hopeful, better yet cheaper option. So I've full disclosure, I haven't played with the Scuff that much. I just know that it's very much what you'd really want to use over this, for example. Yeah, it's a cheaper option, but it's not something you're going to want to use to actually get the same kind of competitive playstyle as the Scuff. Unfortunately, your Scuff broke within a year, so that is pretty bogus. I'd be upset about that. Shogunai says, will it work with second-party controllers? That would be third-party. I'm assuming that's what you mean. Second-party means that Sony would fund the actual thing, which they don't do. They license the PlayStation brand, but I'm assuming you mean third-party, which in that case, it would have to be the exact shape and shell of a Dualshock 4. So obviously, if the controller is completely different, this won't fit on there. If it has the same shell and layout, like when we did unboxings for a bunch of knockoff controllers off of eBay, the shells on those, I mean, yeah, it'll actually plug right in. I don't have those controllers anymore because I gave them away, but I would guess that it would still work. Actually, as a good jumping off point, I also fooled around with the accessibility options on the PS4 UI, where you can completely remap the buttons on a software level, not a controller level, and that will override everything else. So for example, if you change the circle button to be X, and then you map the circle button on the back button, whenever you hit the circle button on the back button, it will input as an X because the software will override everything. And that covers just about everything, so if I didn't touch on something, by all means, send me a tweet over at Mystic Ryan. I'll be happy to answer it for you. If you haven't yet, of course, please subscribe for the best PlayStation news, reviews, and updates that are here on YouTube. And that's it. I will see you all in my next video. You take it easy.